You know, when you're managing a chronic skin condition, there's usually a pretty obvious logic you can follow, like a clear cause and effect.
Right.
You touch something hot, you burn. Or you use some harsh new soap, and your skin dries out. It's just an expected response to an external threat. But then, you look at a condition like lichen sclerosus, and suddenly all that linear, predictable logic just completely breaks down.
Oh, it really does. I
Right.
mean, you're dealing with a localized environment that has just become entirely hypersensitized.
Yeah.
It's no longer responding proportionally to, well, the inputs it receives.
Exactly. And, if you're listening to this deep dive, you probably already know what a lichen sclerosus flare feels like. You know what it looks like. So we don't need to go over the basics like the intense itching or the white crinkled patches on the genital skin. What we're doing today is looking past those symptoms to focus entirely on the underlying mechanism.
Right, getting to the root of it.
Exactly. Our mission for today is to sift through a massive stack of medical literature to answer one really critical question. What actually triggers these flare-ups?
And wow, we have quite the stack today. We're looking at clinical guidelines from the British Association for Sexual Health and HIV, the European Academy of Dermatology, a major scoping review on dietary impacts, plus patient guidance from the NHS, Mayo Clinic, and Yale.
It's a lot of material, and what immediately stands out from all these sources is that the skin isn't just rebelling at random, even when it feels like a flare comes out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, there's always a catalyst.
Right. There's this fascinating, complex web of triggers. And to start untangling it, well, we need to look at the immediate physical environment first.
Exactly. Before we even touch hormones or diet, we have to look at the sheer mechanics of friction, because the mechanical environment is where a lot of the immediate damage actually occurs.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the medical guidelines repeatedly use this specific term, the Koebner response or Koebnerization.
Vaporization. Okay.
Yeah. It's this phenomenon where physical trauma to the skin actually induces the disease to appear or to flare up right in that precise location.
Well, okay, wait. I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. So if we think of the skin as like a high-security alarm system, a normal response is a burglar breaking a window, setting off the siren. Right, that's a standard injury.
Yeah. A normal immune reaction.
But with Koebnerization in LS, it's more like a stray leaf blowing against the glass, and suddenly the alarm triggers, the doors lock down, the police show up. The response is vastly disproportionate.
That is honestly a highly accurate way to look at it. The mechanical stress, that leaf, triggers a localized inflammatory response. And then that actively draws the body's overactive immune cells directly to the surface of the skin.
Wow.
And when we look at what constitutes that mechanical stress in everyday life, it is remarkably mundane.
Which means it's incredibly difficult to avoid for anyone listening, because the sources mention things like wearing tight denim jeans, right? Or cycling shorts.
Yeah. Or synthetic underwear that traps heat and restricts movement. Even routine physical activities like cycling, horseback riding, or even sexual intercourse create enough micro-friction to induce a severe flare.
Just from the friction.
Exactly. Because the tissue architecture is already altered by the condition, regular friction acts as microscopic trauma. The skin just, it cannot absorb the mechanical shear forces the way healthy tissue does.
So someone might go for a weekend bike ride and assume they're just dealing with some normal saddle soreness, but that mechanical friction is actually initiating the autoimmune disease process right there.
Precisely. The friction is basically a localized invitation for the systemic disease to manifest. And actually, the sources highlight a very specific illuminating medical case about this.
Oh, really? What kind of case?
There's a documented case of a transgender female who developed LS post-surgery.
Wait, let me guess. The surgical trauma itself acted as the Koebner trigger.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The postulate here is that the physical trauma and the subsequent scarring from the gender reassignment surgery acted as the exact catalyst.
That's fascinating.
Right. The surgical injury drew the dormant autoimmune response to that specific newly formed genital tissue. It wasn't an inherent flaw in the tissue itself. It was the body's flawed immune reaction to the healing process.
Wow, that really frames the physical trigger in a whole new light. But the physical environment isn't just about friction, is it? Because if we move from mechanical to chemical, the sources are incredibly explicit about environmental moisture and everyday irritants.
Oh, absolutely. The microenvironment of moisture is critical, particularly when we talk about prolonged contact with urine.
Which makes perfect sense chemically, right? Because urine contains ammonia, which is alkaline, and it alters the natural pH of the acid mantle on the skin.
Exactly. I mean, for someone with an intact, healthy skin barrier, Brief contact with urine is just a minor irritant, easily neutralized.
Right.
But for someone with LS, where that stratum corneum, the outermost protective layer, is compromised or thinned or entirely disrupted, that alkaline ammonia is highly inflammatory.
It's essentially chemically burning tissue that has no defenses left.
Yes. And this explains why urinary incontinence, or even just a tiny amount of urine trapped under the foreskin in uncircumcised men, is identified as a major catalyst for flare-ups.
Makes total sense.
The chemical alteration of the skin surface pH further degrades whatever barrier is left, creating this perfect storm for inflammation.
And the chemical assault doesn't stop with bodily fluids either. The patient leaflets from the NHS and the British Society for the Study of Vulval Disease list common household products as massive culprits.
Oh yeah, everyday items.
Like biological washing powders, fabric conditioners, scented soaps, bubble baths.
Right, because those products are designed to break down oils and proteins on your clothes or your skin. On a healthy individual, the skin replenishes its lipid barrier pretty quickly.
But on LS-affected skin,
Those harsh surfactants and synthetic fragrances completely strip away whatever fragile lipid barrier is even there. You are exposing raw, hyperreactive immune cells directly to synthetic chemicals.
so people are unknowingly washing their clothes in the very triggers that cause their flares. But here's the part that genuinely caught my attention in the literature. The natural remedies. The stuff people turn to when they are actively trying to soothe the burning and itching.
Ah, yes. You're referring to the warnings against aloe vera, tea tree oil, and over-the-counter nappy creams.
Yes, because these are marketed as soothing botanicals, right? But the guidelines explicitly warn against them. Mechanically speaking, why would pure aloe vera provoke an LS flare?
Well, it all comes back to the concept of the compromised barrier. Botanical extracts and essential oils, even the ones we consider gentle, contain hundreds of active, complex organic compounds.
Okay.
Processing those compounds requires a robust, intact skin barrier. When you apply them to LS skin, the immune system doesn't see a soothing plant extract. It sees a massive flood of foreign, unrecognized proteins entering through a broken barrier.
Oh, wow. So instead of soothing the skin, it provokes an allergic or irritant contact dermatitis.
Precisely. And what did we just establish about contact dermatitis or any localized irritation?
That it causes inflammation, which triggers the Koebner response, which then draws the autoimmune cells to the surface and makes the LS infinitely worse. It's like a cascading failure.
Exactly. It just spirals.
Okay, so the external landscape is fraught with physical shear forces and chemical irritants. But that leads to an obvious question about causality. If the outside environment is just the trigger, what is fundamentally altering the internal environment to make the skin so vulnerable in the first place?
Right. To understand that, we have to look systemically. We need to examine how the immune system is being influenced by psychological and endocrine factors.
Let's start with the psychological, because stress is cited in virtually every single patient leaflet we reviewed.
It is.
But I mean, I always find stress to be an incredibly vague medical term. We know a bad day at the office doesn't spontaneously create an autoimmune disease. So how mechanically is emotional stress translating into a physical skin flare?
It's a vital mechanism to understand. So, when you experience sustained emotional tension, anxiety, or depression, which, let's face it, are practically a given when managing a chronic painful condition, your body shifts into a chronic sympathetic nervous system state.
Like the fight or flight response.
Exactly. It continuously releases cortisol and other stress hormones.
And cortisol is essentially the body's alarm bell, right? It changes how the immune system functions.
Right. Prolonged elevated cortisol disrupts normal immune regulation. It suppresses certain protective immune functions, while paradoxically promoting systemic low-grade inflammation.
Wow.
But in the context of lichen sclerosus, the stress response also has a direct neurogenic component. It actually makes the peripheral nerve endings in the skin hyperreactive.
Wait, so the nerves are firing signals of irritation and itchiness, even when there is literally no external irritant present?
Yes. The threshold for perceiving an itch drops dramatically, and this leads directly into the dreaded itch-scratch cycle. The psychological stress lowers the itch threshold. The patient feels an overwhelming urge to scratch.
And scratching introduces physical trauma, which loops us right back to the Koebner phenomenon. The mechanical damage from the fingernails creates a massive inflammatory cascade.
Exactly.
So the psychological stress essentially forces a physical action that exacerbates the disease.
It is a devastating, self-perpetuating feedback loop. And, The stress response doesn't exist in a vacuum either.
Mhm.
Those prolonged cortisol spikes also deeply disrupt the endocrine system. They can suppress the production of reproductive hormones.
Which brings us directly to another major internal trigger highlighted in the data, the hormonal link. Because the demographic data in these sources paints a highly specific picture of who gets LS and when, it is overwhelmingly linked to low estrogen states.
Well, the correlation is undeniable. Estrogen plays a huge structural role in the body. It is vital for maintaining the elasticity, thickness, blood flow, and moisture of mucosal and genital tissues.
Okay.
So when circulating estrogen levels drop, that tissue naturally undergoes atrophy. It thins out, loses its elasticity, and becomes vastly more susceptible to micro-tearing and inflammation.
Which perfectly maps onto the patient demographics. The sources note that LS frequently appears in prepubertal girls who haven't yet started producing adult levels of estrogen.
Right.
It appears in postpartum mothers whose estrogen levels crash after delivery. It targets peri- and postmenopausal women. And it even appears in younger women using low-dose oral birth control pills, which suppress natural estrogen production.
Exactly. The hormonal environment acts as the primer. It creates the physical vulnerability. But the true spark, the engine driving the disease, is the immune system. The medical consensus across all these sources strongly supports that LS is fundamentally an autoimmune process.
And the statistics in that 2019 review we looked at are genuinely startling. They found that 82% of LS patients had at least one other concurrent autoimmune condition.
It's a huge number.
Yeah.
We see high associations with autoimmune thyroid disease, alopecia areata, which causes patchy hair loss, and vitiligo, which destroys the skin's pigment-producing cells.
So if you have thyroid issues and LS, it's not a coincidence.
Not at all. It indicates a systemic dysfunction. To use an analogy, instead of a well-regulated defense force, the immune system has become like a confused demolition crew.
A confused demolition crew. I like that.
Yeah, it's lost the ability to distinguish between a dilapidated building that actually needs removing and a perfectly sound structural wall. It starts tearing down the healthy tissue. The skin just happens to be one of the walls this confused crew is attacking.
That makes a ton of sense. The body's tolerance mechanisms have failed on a systemic level, which brings us to a really crucial pivot point.
Diet.
Yes, because if systemic internal inflammation and an overactive immune system are the underlying drivers, it is completely logical that people would turn to the most direct way we interact with our internal chemistry, our diet.
The dietary debate.
Hmm.
It is easily the most contentious area in the management of chronic inflammatory conditions.
Because if you spend like 5 minutes on a chronic illness forum, you will find incredibly passionate claims. People swearing that eliminating dairy cured them permanently or that a handful of spinach caused the worst flare of their life.
Oh, absolutely.
But when you look at the actual clinical guidelines in our stack,
Right.
there is a massive gap. The clinical sources barely touch on diet at all.
They really don't.
Yeah.
Which is exactly why the comprehensive scoping review by Jeremy Ellis and colleagues, which is included in our sources, is so important. It specifically analyzed the literature surrounding dietary modifications for LS.
So let's look at the hard data. Are these popular online protocols like strict gluten-free or dairy-free diets actually supported by the medical literature we have?
Well, the reality is that the scientific literature regarding diet and LS is extremely sparse. It's often highly flawed, and it relies heavily on self-reported anecdotes. There is currently no large-scale, randomized controlled trial that proves the existence of a universal LS diet. But the Ellis review did isolate a few specific dietary factors that warrant a closer look, just based on biological plausibility.
Let's break those down. What did they find regarding meat and oxalates? Because oxalates come up constantly in these online discussions.
Let's start with the meat. One retrospective study noted that 26% of symptomatic patients reported an exacerbation of their symptoms after consuming pork and pork derivatives, things like sausages and ham.
Is there a physiological reason for pork specifically?
Processed pork products are typically high in advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, and preservatives, which are known systemic inflammatory markers.
Okay, that makes sense.
As for oxalates, this is where it gets complex. Oxalates are naturally occurring compounds found in very healthy foods: spinach, sweet potatoes, almonds.
Right, things we are usually told to eat a lot more of.
Exactly. Now, the body doesn't actually use oxalates, so it excretes them through the urine. And as we established earlier, urine is a major chemical trigger for LS flares.
Oh.
Yeah. The theory is that high concentrations of oxalate crystals in the urine create microscopic mechanical friction and chemical irritation when they pass over the compromised tissue.
Wow, that perfectly connects the dietary input directly to the chemical and physical triggers we just discussed.
It does, in theory. However, the data is conflicting. One study focusing on vulvodynia, which is a chronic pain condition that often overlaps with LS, showed that 24% of patients experienced relief when they adopted a low oxalate diet.
Okay.
But another similar study showed absolutely zero correlation. It appears to be a highly individualized sensitivity rather than a universal rule.
What about broader inflammatory foods? Sugar is usually the first thing people point to when discussing inflammation.
And the data supports that concern. Diets high in refined sugars lead to hyperglycemia, which is chronically elevated blood glucose.
Right.
Sustained hyperglycemia directly damages blood vessels and tissue structures, and it keeps the immune system locked in an active inflammatory state. For an autoimmune condition characterized by fragile tissue, elevated blood sugar is undeniably detrimental.
Makes complete sense.
The review also touched briefly on spicy foods, noting one study where women who preferred spicy diets had a 2.1 times higher risk of developing vulvar leukoplakia, which presents with similar white patches.
Though I imagine tracking exactly how much spice someone eats relies on self-reporting, which is notoriously unreliable in studies.
Precisely. It's an interesting correlation, but certainly not definitive proof of causation.
Okay, I want to tackle the biggest dietary claim out there, gluten. The wellness space often frames gluten as the ultimate antagonist for any autoimmune disease. What does our medical stack actually say about gluten and lichen sclerosus?
This is perhaps the most fascinating revelation in the scoping review. The researchers highlighted a clinical report detailing 3 specific pediatric cases. And these were young patients who had been diagnosed with both celiac disease, which is a severe systemic autoimmune reaction to gluten, and lichen sclerosus.
Wow, that's a unique control group. You have patients with a proven severe gluten intolerance and a concurrent LS diagnosis. So when they were put on a strict gluten-free diet to manage the celiac, what happened to the LS?
Well, the strict gluten-free diet was highly successful for the celiac disease. It completely resolved their gastrointestinal symptoms,
Right.
but it had zero impact on their LS lesions. The lichen sclerosus progressed completely unchanged.
Wait, really? Nothing at all.
Nothing.
That is incredibly revealing. It demonstrates that even when 2 autoimmune conditions exist in the exact same body, they're operating on distinctly different immune pathways. You can't just flip one master switch like removing gluten and expect it to cure a completely separate autoimmune mechanism.
Exactly. It really cautions against the assumption that all autoimmune diseases share the same dietary triggers.
So, synthesizing all of this.
Yeah.
What is the actionable takeaway for someone listening who wants to use diet to manage their flares?
The consensus from the medical sources is to approach diet as an individual experiment rather than looking for a universal cure. Highly restrictive, generic elimination diets like cutting out all oxalates, dairy, and gluten at once can actually be detrimental by causing severe nutritional deficiencies.
Right. You don't want to starve your body of nutrients.
Exactly. Instead, the recommendation is to maintain a detailed personal food and symptom diary. You act as a detective for your own body. You might find that you specifically lack the enzyme to break down histamines in aged cheeses, causing a flare, whereas someone else can eat cheese perfectly fine but react severely to the preservatives in processed meats.
So we're really looking at a highly individualized multi-front strategy. If you are navigating this or helping someone who is, you are essentially managing an entire ecosystem.
You really are.
You have to minimize mechanical shear forces from clothing, meticulously protect the skin barrier from chemical irritants like alkaline urine and harsh soaps, try to regulate your nervous system to prevent cortisol spikes from driving the itch cycle, and methodically track your personal dietary responses.
It is a profound amount of daily management, which is exactly why we need to be clear about the clinical consensus regarding long-term treatment. Avoiding triggers is essential for managing daily comfort, but lifestyle changes alone are rarely sufficient to halt the underlying disease process.
Right. The medical guidelines from the UK, Europe, and the US are entirely aligned on this.
They are. The undisputed gold standard for maintenance is the use of ultra-potent topical corticosteroids, such as clobetasol propionate, utilized alongside bland soap substitute emollients.
And based on everything we've discussed about the immune system acting like a confused demolition crew, it makes sense why these steroids are necessary. They aren't just a Band-Aid or a numbing cream.
Correct. Ultrapotent topical steroids work by actively suppressing the localized immune response within those specific tissue layers.
Yeah.
They force the demolition crew to stop working.
Oh, I see.
This halts the inflammation, breaks the cobnarization cycle, and most importantly prevents the irreversible scarring and architectural changes to the anatomy. It is active disease modification.
Which really underscores why sticking to a prescribed medical treatment is so critical, even when you've perfectly managed your external triggers.
Absolutely.
But before we close this deep dive, there is one final concept from the DermNet literature in our stack that really challenges everything we think we know about this condition.
Oh, you're talking about the ECM1 antibodies? This is right at the cutting edge of current dermatological research.
Yeah. The sources indicate that between 60 and 80% of women with vulval LS test positive for antibodies against a specific protein called extracellular matrix protein 1, or ECM1. Now, conventional logic says, if there are antibodies attacking a protein, the immune system has gone rogue and is causing the disease by destroying that protein.
Right. But researchers are asking a deeply provocative question. What if those ECM1 antibodies aren't the original cause of the disease? What if they are an epiphenomenon?
Meaning they are a secondary byproduct. They arise from the disease process, but they didn't actually start it.
Exactly. It presents a profound biological mystery. Is the immune system the unprovoked aggressor initiating the destruction? Or is there some unseen trigger, a past viral infection, a specific environmental damage, or a mechanism we simply lack the technology to see yet that damages the ECM1 protein first?
Wow.
In that scenario, the immune system isn't attacking the body, it's just rushing in to clean up the debris of a battle that had already occurred, producing antibodies against the broken protein fragments it finds.
It completely reframes the narrative.
Yeah.
Instead of the body betraying itself, the body might just be mounting a confused defense against an invisible initial trigger.
Yeah.
It makes you reconsider that high-security alarm system analogy. Maybe the alarm isn't malfunctioning. Maybe it's ringing exactly as it should, alerting us to a break-in that medical science simply hasn't caught on camera yet.
It is a powerful reminder that in the medical sciences, discovering how a mechanism works is usually just the first step toward discovering the true why.
And chasing that why is exactly what we love doing here. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep questioning the world and the science around you.